Hey guys, my name is Kaleeka Bond. So are you ready to set up a still life? Do you have something to take notes with? I'm gonna go over composition, structure, value, what objects to choose. Where do we begin? Get ready, here we go. Let's begin here. So I've set this up. What do you think about this still life? Does it interest you? Does it intrigue you? Is it something you'd wanna draw? Well, let's go over some of the things that I see that are a challenge with this still life. First of all, let's talk about tangents. Do you know what a tangent is? Well, a tangent when it comes to art is an awkward part of a drawing that stands out to the viewer. So one example of a tangent would be, I guess the most obvious one is our lemon, okay? So if you look at the lemon, you can see the top edge of the lemon here lines up with the tabletop there. That's considered a tangent. You don't want that to happen. So that's one. Another one is if you look at this cup right here, notice how the tomato is completely blocking the bottom of that cup. It's a little awkward. It's very hard to see that this cup is grounded on the surface. So you can consider that to be another tangent. If I were to move this fork a little higher, see how it's hitting right there, the top edge of the shell? That's another tangent. Not to mention that it's just not that interesting. I feel like we have too much going on. Things are there, but they don't really have any focal point. So let's start changing some things around, moving some things around, and talk about what makes a strong composition. So I've taken some items out, and you'll notice that most of the items that are left here are pretty brown. I've got a shell, some ginger, a cup, and also the tabletop that we're working on is a wooden kind of brown tabletop. So if I were to do a value drawing of this, let's talk about how we can change some of these items, move some things around, keep 3 items there. I like to work in an odd number versus an even number. If I were to put 2 apples on the table, your eye would easily break up those 2 apples into 2 different parts. But when you have an odd number, it's very hard to break that apart. So typically when you set up a still life, try to opt for odd number of objects. So I'm gonna keep the cup and see how I can rearrange this to make a stronger composition. So the first thing I did here was add a white piece of paper. And what that does is it helps contrast the cup to the table. Now you're seeing more of a whiter area on the bottom and a little bit more of that tannish kind of grayish area at the top versus having this brown table we had before. I'm gonna add in an apple, okay? Now, when I place this apple here, I don't necessarily wanna cover the handle. That's a little awkward. So what I'll do is I'll slide this over to my left, and then if you see the stem here, typically when you have a viewer looking at something, they're gonna follow this stem and go off the page, okay? So it's just like me pointing this way, you're gonna follow my hand off the page. So instead, let's turn the apple inward, okay? Now you're noticing in the camera, you see a little bit, again, a tangent where this stem is lining up with the side of the cup. So I'm gonna push this slightly over to the left. And now we have another tangent with the tip of the stem. So you gotta play around with your objects. Do you want to move this here? Do you wanna separate it? We could separate it a little bit and just kind of move things around. I'm gonna pull this a little bit more towards my right side, okay, just so I have a little bit more space of the white paper. And I like that there's an overlap and that there's not a tangent here. You can still see an overlap. I'm just gonna push this cup slightly to the left, okay, and there we go. So I'm gonna add one more object to this. I have the shell here, okay, so let's think about where we could place this shell. So I wanna do 3. I have 2 objects that are already overlapping, okay, so I could put this one here. What's nice is this can create a little bit of what we call foreshorten. So if something is moving this way, where it's going away from you, towards you, at either a diagonal or it could be going straight back, straight forward, that's called foreshortening, okay? So this would be foreshortened, okay? This would be not foreshortened, okay? So I typically like to make things a little bit more foreshortened to create more interest. Now if I turn this way, that actually creates a little bit more interest. I get the foreshortening of the shell. I also can see into the shell as well. Now for a value drawing, this is not ideal in terms of lighting. Things are really flooded. I'm using a ring light right now. You can use any light that you want, but I'm going to change the lighting and show you the difference if this were a value drawing. Now this is a much stronger light to work from when it comes to doing value in a still life. You get a lot of contrasting values here. You can see in the inside of the cup the darkness here versus the lightness here. You can also see the light mass coming from the left side of the cup, shadow mass moving onto the right side of the cup. We're also picking up on this area over here, which is called reflected light, where it gets a little bit lighter. So some of these terms you may not know, but keep in mind, one of the whole reasons why you're applying to this program is for you to get to understand these terms a little bit better. So when you actually get a chance to be in Ryman Arts, these are some of the things you're going to learn while you're studying as well. On the apple, I've chosen a red apple because I have a mug that is more yellow, and we talked about contrasting some of the colors. And again, even if this is going to be a graphite drawing, one of the reasons why you want to change the color is because if all of the items we had up here, let's say I decided to add in these tomatoes, you can see how the red of these tomatoes is very similar to the red of the apple. And if you add too much of the same color next to each other, what happens is the values end up being the same. There's not much difference between, you know, the dark part of this tomato here and this area over here in the apple. So by changing the color of the object, then I'm able to get a little bit more value ranges out of it. So this would be a better still life to think about. Now here's an example of how positive and negative space are going to play an important role in your composition. So right now my camera is really close to the still life. Now I want you to think about the shot that you're seeing right now is your actual paper, which means there's not much space around the objects. The space around the objects, that's considered negative space, and the objects themselves are positive. But positive and negative are equally important. So if you zoom too far into your still life, you're not going to have enough negative space around the item. So it's important to kind of zoom out. If I were to do this drawing, I would probably have my paper be about here. So I would have a nice balance of negative space. Now also keep in mind where you place this left to right. If I pull my camera too far over here, my composition moves too far to the right. You'll notice how my cast shadows, which are right here, are falling off of the composition. And on the left side, I have so much negative space here. Now that does not make a really strong composition. You could also do something where you are too bottom heavy, okay? So you've got items that are really low on your composition and you have a lot of space at the top. So you want to balance that out, maybe pull it down just a little bit, okay? You'll notice when I initially showed you this still life, I was low in terms of eye level. So I would not recommend drawing a still life like this, okay? The problem with doing that is you don't have enough overlap in your objects. Things become very spaced apart and there's not much connection between some of the objects. So when you bring your viewpoint a little lower, something here, you get a little bit of overlap. And what that overlap does is when you look at the composition, anything that is in front, for example, the apple is in front of the cup, anything that's in front will be lower on your picture plane. Picture plane is this whole box that you're seeing in terms of, like, if I put my finger right here, this whole area of me tracing around the camera, that's called your picture plane. An example of a picture plane is me using my hands like this and here and moving that back. That's going to be my picture plane. That's me trying to see the composition. You can do that also when you're looking at a still life. So you want to keep in mind that in terms of your picture plane, you got to balance out that positive and negative space. Another tip while preparing a still life is try not to have all objects be the same shape. Now remember in the beginning I had showed you some tomatoes. I had also had a lemon in there, but I didn't choose to use those because they're so similar to the apple. So I eliminated that and opted for the apple, the shell, and the cup. But you could also add things like, I don't know, pins and a cup holder. You could add forks to give a different kind of texture. So you're dealing with metal. You could swap out your cup for a glass. And if you want to make it even more interesting, add water to your glass. That always makes it fun. You could change your apple for a lemon. Think about a little bit more foreshortening. And notice how I'm not blocking the entire bottom of the cup. Okay, so that makes a stronger composition versus me putting this directly in front of it. I put it off to the side, and I also use that foreshortening we talked about before, so it's moving towards us as a viewer to avoid the tangent, which would be if I put it right there, of the edges touching. I just let that item overlap. You can pull it forward also, okay, so it makes it go lower on your picture plane. And then you could move the cup if you want to. Once you figure out where the lemon needs to be, you can move the cup. I have some writing. I reversed that, turned it backwards. You can put that in what we call three-quarter view. So instead of putting it straight back, you can turn it off to the side. You can ignore the writing altogether. I can take out this, okay, and put in something else like the apple, okay. Now for me, it seems like the cup, let's take this out. Seems like the cup just kind of gets lost behind the lemon and the apple. Okay, let's bring the camera down a little bit so you guys see what I'm talking about. So what I would do in this case, while I'm adding objects in here, I would take this one out because it seems a little lost. And instead of using that, I would swap it for this one, okay? Now, right now my camera is kind of low, so we'll pull this up so you guys can see the whole composition, something here. I have a tangent with the apple, so I'm going to separate the apple. I'll let the lemon overlap. So we'll just kind of pull that out and have a little bit foreshortening. So this would be also a composition you could use. So did that help? Did you learn anything? Hopefully. Well, now it's time to apply it. Get ready to draw.